I wanted to take some time just to quickly walk through the performance ratings on Archon for what's going on beta for the tanks. Now, this isn't going to be a super in-depth video, but I do want to kind of share my thoughts about what's going on. Now, I'll leave the link to this down below, so you can always take a look for yourself. But this is going to be a fairly okay indicator on like how the quote unquote meta coming out of beta is shaping up. Now, of course, Blizzard is always it can always make tuning adjustments at any point, and we're probably going to see some pretty, I wouldn't say significant, but probably sizable damage buffs or nerfs or survivability buffs or nerfs to a bunch of the different tanks over the first couple of weeks of the season, as people start getting into max level content and as heroic raids begin to open up. So really quick, obviously, if you've been paying attention to beta, Brewmaster right now is probably the most meta tank. It has kind of everything you need in a tank this season. While its utility kit isn't perfect, it does offer good damage, good healing, good survivability, and its toolkit isn't terrible. Having things like Ring of Peace, Paralysis, a relatively short kick, a AoE stun, these are all things that are really good. Also, the way that they're currently taking damage with the removal of their defensives, but the buff to their like kind of baseline stagger and people running things like Bob and Weave makes them an extremely powerful, sturdy tank, as long as the healer keeps a little bit of attention on them with some occasional heals. Now, right after Brewmaster, actually, there's three tanks that are performing quite well on beta still. This includes Vengeance Demon Hunter, specifically Annihilator. It also includes Guardian Druid, specifically Druid of the Claw. And actually, both Protection Warrior specs are doing quite well, but people are still leaning into Mountain Thane. And this mostly comes down to the way that the tree interacts with the Warriors kit, especially in early seasons. Having additional rage and additional resources from that makes them a little bit stronger. Now, unfortunately, Paladin was doing really strong after buffs earlier on in the beta, but since then they have been nerfed slightly and had some bug fixes that were making them overperform. And Prop Paladin is kind of becoming a little bit of a glass cannon tank, in my opinion. It's just really struggling at getting certain things done or living certain pulls that other tanks can do quite easily. It becomes a little bit more uncomfortable when you're playing with a protection paladin. And then finally, like Death Knight. Death Knight, I just feel like not a lot of people are playing Death Knight, but they have been doing up to 20s, similar to every other tank. So they're just, I don't think, getting the representation that they probably deserve. But there's still some, glaring issues with how Death Knight operates in Mythic Plus that I think it's difficult without reworks to address on Blizzard's end. Now, getting into more of the specifics, I do want to actually talk about how the different hero specializations are shaping up and maybe point out some kind of glaring issues. So as we look at max key, you're going to see that Shado-pan actually has times some 21s. I believe this was Kira and some people that he's been playing with. But this was, I think, before like the damage pot nerfs and some of the dungeon buffs. So right now, most players that I'm seeing are still struggling. Not struggling, but like it's 19s, 20s are pretty difficult. So this is kind of an outlier before things got, changed. But as you can see, most tanks, actually every tank, has done a 20. Deathbringer, DK, Mountain Thane, Prot Warrior, Druid of the Claw, Guardian Druid, Annihilator, DH, and Lightsmith, Prot Paladin. Now, most of the things that are going on with these other hero talent specializations, so probably like, I wouldn't say Master of Harmony. I think Master of Harmony actually could. There's kind of a build that has recently cropped up that's making them extremely strong. And I think if we go back a couple weeks, but with the current state of the game, actually, that doesn't really make sense. But basically, I think if we went back to when this 21 was timed, I'm sure a Master of Harmony could have done a 20 with how it's currently operating. Now, basically, all of these other four are having issues when it comes to either survivability or damage is kind of the big part. And that's why these classes are tending to struggle a little bit. So the interesting thing is that over the last week or two, there has been a build that's cropped up that I actually showcased in a video a couple of days ago that is making Master of Harmony actually doing so much more damage on average than Shado-pan. And now this could be for a lot of reasons. The people who are probably playing this probably know how to play it versus everyone who sees that Shado-pan is doing really well and just slot it in, and maybe they're not optimizing every little detail about the class. So obviously having more parses is going to bring the average probably more in line with what an average is, versus this is probably more of an outlier because people who are playing it are performing better on it. But the Master of Harmony is actually doing bigger overall damage than Shado-pan is currently, and that's mostly because their damage in AoE environments is extremely consistent, Now, while it doesn't scale into super large pulls like the first pull of Algothar Academy, for example, at a baseline, it is doing really high damage all the time, between 100 and 150k. You'll see 200k, and obviously in big pulls, you're still going to see them going 300, 400, 500k for a period of time. But they really shine in like the low target count, and their single target damage is competitive with most other classes. Now, my sample size is limited to the people I've been playing with, so I never know who I'm playing with. And sometimes it's people who might not know the class, they might be trying a new build. So obviously that's kind of is like the caveat of this. But their single target damage is so impressive, and that's allowing their average overall to actually remain super high. Now, Guardian Druid is still doing really, really well, and it's doing this. A lot of this damage is actually just single target and AoE. Ravage is doing insane damage, maintaining things like Moonless Night to get additional direct damage as well. Now, unfortunately, it is a little RNG based on like auto attack chance to proc a Ravage, and if you get at the right time during Incarn with the Apex that can replicate, Druid of the Claw can really pack a punch. Now, I would say most of their tanks are actually pretty balanced right now. So we're seeing a lot of tanks kind of end around that like 89k, 90k mark, with Sandlane being a little higher, Annihilator being a little bit lower. Now, this is mostly going to come down to their lack of single target, maybe. So that's really what's pulling some of these tanks back, is that their single target damage is just so low. So their overalls look kind of beans. Now, Eldrazi Reaver is the big standout right now. Eldrazi Reaver's overall damage, or even in larger AoE, feels like it's like quite literally half of what the top tank is doing. And I think this is just a result of there being bugs in the game. Blizzard nerfing the class, at least from what I can tell, is they like nerf the class before addressing the bugs, which obviously will affect them post bug fix when the bug fix is a beneficial bug. And so now what's happening is it like kind of double dipped, and now they're doing like super low damage, which is unfortunate because Eldrazi Reaver, I think, is a much more enjoyable playstyle than Annihilator. Has like a nice damage profile kit with like good priority damage and I almost arguably funnel damage. And so I hope that they end up buffing Eldrazi. I think this is still the big outlier when it comes to kind of the tank balancing. Anyways, do take all of this with a grain of salt. As you can see here, this also requires a logged run. There are over 2,000 Shado-pan parses or logs, and there's only 9 Eldrazi Reaver. So again, there's like a massive outlier here. Even some of these other tanks like Templar and Colossus, there's only they're only in the 20s. So this data isn't necessarily probably the most accurate, but it is interesting to look at and kind of get a somewhat of like a nice view in through the window into beta to see how things are performing and shaping up. Now, I'm sure there's still, plenty of bugs that are still going around. There's obviously still plenty of tuning that can still happen. So I'm hoping that they do bump up some of these lower performing classes to where, Lightsmith is and Druid of the Claw and Shado-pan. But we'll see. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this little breakdown. My hope is that I can do one last kind of like tank comparison video where I go into like something like Algothar Academy or a different dungeon and just like try to stress test the tanks to see how they perform in terms of damage, performance, survivability, whatever it might be. I am still, but I am working on, all my dungeon guides and my routing guides and my brewmaster guide and potentially some other tank guides. So I have a lot on my plate. So if I don't end up getting around to it, I apologize. But I'm trying to get, productive content out before the expansion launches, which obviously takes up time. So anyways, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.